Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
You could have just kept quiet, the union rep told me, her voice low, almost sympathetic, like she was doing me some kind of favor. I smiled, not because I felt good, but because I'd already decided 2 days ago when I found that email that I wasn't the kind of guy who sits down when the chair's been kicked out from under him. Not anymore. That's not who I am, I said. And the next vote said the rest. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real beginning, the part that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, happened the day they moved our Q1 review meeting to a smaller room. Now, I know that sounds stupid, but trust me, in corporate America, everything means something when the knives are out. We had always done our quarterly project reviews in conference room B, where the TV actually worked, where the chairs didn't wobble, where the coffee from downstairs was still hot by the time you settled in. But that morning, I got a calendar update from Carl's assistant, saying we were shifting to Breakout 3, which was basically a glorified closet with a whiteboard and one window that faced a brick wall. I walked in to find half my team already there, standing awkwardly, coffee in hand, wondering why the hell we were crammed into a space the size of a dentist waiting room. Carl, our new director of operations, was at the front with his laptop, already halfway through a slide deck nobody had seen before. I remember thinking, oh, so we're skipping the pleasantries today? That should have been red flag number one. Carl Bennett. He was the kind of guy who always looked like he had just gotten a fresh haircut, even on Monday mornings. Slick, 20 pounds of muscle under a slim-fit suit, and an MBA from somewhere expensive. He smiled like a man who practiced it in the mirror. Carl didn't care about the product or the people. He cared about charts, headlines, and any sentence that ended with scale. And I was the opposite. 18 years at the company, back when it was a ragtag group of tech weirdos with more ideas than money. I didn't wear blazers. I wore cardigans that smelled like dry erase markers. But I got things done, and until Carl showed up, that had always been enough. So I stood there, shoulder to shoulder with analysts and engineers I'd mentored for years, watching Carl flip through a PowerPoint titled, Q1 Delays, Project GLX. The GLX project was mine, or at least it had been until about 6 weeks ago when Carl started reallocating resources without telling me. Now, slide after slide listed missed milestones, red highlighted delivery failures, and one name underneath all of it, mine. Not one word about how Carl cut our backend budget by 40%, or how he had to merge 3 data platforms without any extra dev time. No mention of the junior staff he reassigned to marketing for that vanity campaign. Just bullet points, missed KPIs, and phrases like leadership gaps that stung worse than a slap. I raised my hand, like a chump. Carl, I didn't approve this version of the timeline. The resource changes. He cut me off. Let's not get emotional, Mark. Emotional. I wanted to laugh. 18 years, and I'm suddenly the guy who's too sensitive to read a spreadsheet. My jaw clenched so tight my molars ached. I looked around the room, hoping someone else would speak up, maybe Amy from design or Javier from systems. But everyone kept their eyes on their coffee cups like they were hoping to disappear inside them. I knew then what this was. I wasn't just being blamed. I was being framed. And not for something minor, either. This was groundwork. A paper trail. A future justification, nice and tidy, for when someone finally said, it's time to let Mark go. After the meeting, Carl pulled me aside with that same shiny smile. It's nothing personal, he said. We just need to show the board we're serious about accountability. Accountability. That's corporate for, you're about to get screwed. I went back to my desk, didn't say a word to anyone. Just stared at my screensaver while my mind spun through every time I'd stayed late, every time I skipped dinner with my wife because Carl wanted one more revision, every time I told myself, this is just a phase. They'll see your value. By the time lunch rolled around, I knew I needed to check my backups. I had started blind copying myself on project updates months ago. Something about Carl's management style had rubbed me wrong from the beginning. Call it intuition or just paranoia built from 2 decades in the same cubicle, watching good people get edged out by slick-talking ladder climbers. I opened my personal inbox and started scrolling. Found emails, change logs, version histories, everything that showed the original plan had been torpedoed by decisions that didn't come from me. And then, there it was, a forwarded message chain between Carl and HR, accidentally CC'd to a wrong Mark, the new guy in legal. And new guy Mark, bless him, had passed it along with a question. Did you mean to send this to me? The email was titled, Offboarding Strategy, MH, Target Q2. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a hit job. So yeah, when the union rep told me I should have kept quiet, what she meant was, you should have let them do this to you quietly. Let it happen, take your severance, fade into LinkedIn irrelevance. But that's not who I am. I'd taken the punches before, kept my head down while other people played politics. I'd swallowed more than my share of corporate nonsense, reorgs, forced relocations, pay freezes while the execs got bonuses. But this time I had the receipts. So I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I was ready. And honestly, I'd been quiet long enough. I didn't always have a target on my back. There was a time, not that long ago, when I actually mattered around here, when people came to me for advice, direction, and sometimes just a little damn sanity in the middle of whatever fire Carl's predecessor had accidentally set ablaze. I started with the company back in 2007, before we had a working coffee machine or a real HR department, back when the CEO still wore hoodies and called us the garage crew. Even though we were working out of a converted storage unit behind a dry cleaner. It was scrappy, chaotic, beautiful in a way I didn't even realize until years later when the gloss of corporate polish dulled everything to beige. Back then, I was hungry. 35 years old, finally breaking out of my third failed startup, and desperate to prove I wasn't just another guy with ideas and no follow-through. I worked 80-hour weeks without complaint, led projects from scratch, mentored interns, fought for raises for people that weren't even on my team because I believed in building something that wasn't just profitable but actually good. And it worked, at least for a while. I became a manager, then a senior PM, then eventually the guy you called when things were slipping off the rails and you needed someone to pull the train back onto the tracks before Monday. I had a reputation, and not just because I was good at spreadsheets or writing clean specs. I was known as the fixer, the calm in the storm, the guy who never threw you under the bus, even when it would have been easier. My wife used to joke that the company owed her part of my paycheck, considering how many holidays and anniversaries I missed to babysit late-night launches. One time, she brought the kids to the office and left them at my desk with a note that said, "In case you forgot what your family looks like." She wasn't wrong. I thought I was building a future for us. What I was actually building was a reputation that ended up painting a target on my chest when the culture shifted. And shift it did. Slowly, at first, like a bad smell creeping in under the door. Around 2019, new leadership came in from one of the firms we'd acquired, and suddenly our scrappy, collaborative little company started feeling more like a soulless machine, designed to crank out just enough results to keep shareholders smiling without ever stopping to ask why we were doing anything in the first place. We stopped talking about people and started talking about roles, FTEs, redundancies. Everyone was leveraged, reassigned, or streamlined. It was like watching your favorite band get replaced by a tribute act that only knew the chorus. Then came Carl Bennett. Carl arrived with the kind of confidence that only ever seems to show up in men who have never failed hard enough to know they should be nervous. He spoke in acronyms, loved walking meetings, and introduced himself to me like I hadn't been running the GLX team for 6 straight years. He called me Martin twice in our first one-on-one. I corrected him both times. Still got a great job, Martin, in an email a week later. The guy wasn't stupid, not exactly, he just didn't care. About the team, the product, or the people who built the damn company before he showed up with his deck of strategic optimizations. Carl's first move was to cut our documentation team in half. Said we could auto-generate half the manuals using AI tools we didn't even have licenses for yet. Then he started consolidating project ownership. Too many cooks, he said. But funny thing, he never seemed to reduce his number of direct reports. What he did do was assign a junior project coordinator to shadow me, Derek, fresh out of business school, full of buzzwords and blind ambition. Nice enough kid, I guess, but clearly being groomed for something, and I had a good guess at what. I remember one particular meeting with a client, one of our biggest, where I walked through the entire proposed timeline, answered every question, stayed late to rewrite half the scope because the sales team had overpromised. Derek said about 3 words the whole call, and one of them was synergy. 2 days later, Carl forwarded me a thank you note from the client, only it had been sent to Derek. "Nice work," Carl wrote. Exactly what I was hoping for from this new leadership transition. Leadership transition. That was when I started to get that twitch behind my left eye again, the one I hadn't felt since my last company folded in the middle of a product launch because the founders decided to pivot into crypto. Something was happening, and it wasn't just bad management or corporate clumsiness. It was calculated. I was being written out of the story. The kicker came when I requested additional back-end support after our dev lead quit unexpectedly. Carl denied it, said we needed to lean into the challenge and push through constraints, even though our velocity dropped by nearly 30% and we were falling behind on every milestone. When I flagged it in our resource tracker, he removed the ticket and told me to stop playing the blame game. I wasn't blaming anyone. I was begging for help. And still, I tried to believe it was just a phase, that I'd outlast this guy like I outlasted the others. I told myself to keep my head down, deliver clean sprints, hit KPIs, let my work speak for itself. But work doesn't speak for you when the people in power already decided what they wanted to say. It doesn't matter how much you've done or how much you've sacrificed if someone else is holding the pen and rewriting the ending. So when the quarterly meeting came around and I saw my name next to every red box, I wasn't surprised. I was just finally forced to accept what had been obvious for months. Carl wasn't just making room for a new vision. He was making room for his vision. And that vision didn't include guys like me. 12 years of loyalty, late nights, missed birthdays, and what do I get? A quiet shove toward the door and the suggestion that I should take the fall gracefully. Well, grace is overrated. And I wasn't about to let my career end with "thank you for your service" and a bad slide deck. It's strange how quickly everything you thought was stable can suddenly feel like it's built out of wet cardboard, balanced on a foundation of favors and fake smiles, and all it takes is one misdirected email to burn it down to ash. That's exactly what happened the morning I opened my personal inbox and saw a message from a junior legal associate named Mark Tolbert, not to be confused with me, Mark Heller, titled, "I think this was meant for someone else," and right below it, a forwarded thread that made my stomach twist like I'd swallowed gravel and regret. The email chain was internal, at least at first glance. HR, Carl Bennett, and one of the VPs from People Operations I'd never even spoken to, and it was discussing me like I wasn't a person with a mortgage. A family, and 2 decades of blood and weekends poured into their damn bottom line. The subject line alone told me more than enough. Onboarding strategy, MH, target Q2. And right underneath that, a list that still lives in my memory like a recurring nightmare. Establish performance inconsistency pattern, document delayed responses to key deliverables, encourage soft transition via mentorship redundancy, and then, in bold, initiate conversation post-union vote to reduce pushback risk. Now, I've seen a lot of backhanded crap in my career, but this one took the cake and the entire damn bakery with it. They weren't just firing me, they were building a paper trail designed to make it look like I'd earned the fall, like the missed milestones were solely my fault. Like they hadn't gutted my resources and rerouted my authority and intentionally frozen me out of meetings I used to lead. They were trying to erase me so cleanly that when they finally cut me loose, nobody would bother asking why. It would all be justified, neat and tidy, business as usual in a world where loyalty is treated like a cheap accessory they can toss when it clashes with the next quarter's color scheme. I read it twice, then a third time, fingers shaking while I scrolled through every condescending line written by people who'd probably never even looked me in the eye. It was like being at your own funeral and watching the eulogies get rewritten into roast jokes by people who didn't even know your middle name. I didn't know if I should scream or laugh or just put my head down on the keyboard and stay there until the screen went dark. Instead, I copied every single message, zipped it into a folder, and stared at the timestamp like it might morph into something less real. That afternoon, I made the mistake of thinking I still had allies in the building. I walked straight into Karen Shaw's office, our union representative, and, up until that point, someone I genuinely believed gave a damn about the people here. I handed her the printouts, sat down in the chair across from her desk, and waited for the anger, the outrage, the usual Karen fire I'd seen her throw at upper management when the janitorial team's hours got slashed without warning. But she didn't get angry. She got quiet. She looked at the pages, frowned slightly, and ran her hand through her thick gray curls like she was stalling for time. Then she looked at me, not like a friend or even a fellow worker, but like someone who was about to offer a deal they knew I wouldn't like. "Mark," she said, soft but flat, "you could have just kept quiet." It hit me harder than anything Carl ever said, because I didn't expect it from her, not from someone who once rallied us during the pension freeze, not from someone who wore union pins like armor and chewed out supervisors for making interns cry. I thought we were on the same side. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was going to be the part where someone else stood up with me and said, "This isn't right." Instead, she folded her hands and added, "They're going to say you're retaliating. If you push this, it could backfire. You might lose severance. They'll come at you sideways." I leaned back, stared at the ceiling like it might offer better answers than I was getting from her. Then I looked back down and asked, point blank, "How long have you known?" She didn't answer. That's when I realized I'd been fighting the wrong battle. It wasn't just about Carl or the HR buzzards circling above. It was the whole system. The whole rotting, rusted engine that pretended to be about fairness and support, but was really just a factory for plausible deniability and performance reviews that could be weaponized like baseball bats. Karen wasn't the exception. She was just another cog who decided it was easier to stay greased and quiet than get ground up trying to fight something bigger than her paycheck. And here's the thing, I wasn't even that mad at her. I mean, I was. But I understood it in a way I didn't want to admit. After all, she had a mortgage, too. A couple of grandkids she talked about constantly. Maybe she'd been burned before. Maybe she'd chosen silence a long time ago and never quite forgave herself. So now she just called it pragmatism. But me? I couldn't swallow it. I couldn't let them rewrite my story like I was just another underperformer who couldn't keep up with the times. Because that wasn't true, and they damn well knew it. I'd built systems they still used. I'd trained people who were now training others. I'd kept this place running during the pandemic while Carl was still posting selfies from his Peloton bike. So I told her thank you for her time, stood up, and left the office with the pages still in my hand. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't even say goodbye. By the time I got home, I'd already decided. I wasn't going to fight this from inside their playbook. I wasn't going to beg for meetings or write sad little rebuttal memos that got lost in the HR black hole. I was going to make noise. And I was going to do it loud enough that even Carl wouldn't be able to pretend he didn't hear it. I knew I'd officially crossed the line from disgruntled employee to full-blown threat when HR summoned me to a closed-door meeting and introduced me to a guy named Troy, employee relations specialist, who looked like he'd just stepped out of a podcast studio sponsored by leadership gurus and high-protein snacks. He wore a tight polo that looked painted on and greeted me with a handshake that tried too hard to prove something, like he'd read a book about dominance once and never quite recovered. The second he smiled, I knew exactly why he was there, and more importantly, I knew what I was supposed to do: nod politely, accept the pre-written narrative, sign my name at the dotted line, and disappear quietly with a mediocre severance and a 6-month NDA clause that would effectively erase the last 18 years of my life from the record. Instead, I sat down and let him talk. He opened with a compliment, which was always a bad sign. "Mark," he said, "we know how much you've contributed over the years." He even glanced at a printed profile summary on the table in front of him, as if he needed a cheat sheet just to remember who I was. "You've been a real asset here." Then came the shift, the classic pivot into concern. "But lately," he said, dragging the word out like it hurt his tongue to say it, "we've been getting feedback about your conduct. Disruptive behavior. Accusations. Circulating sensitive materials without approval." I raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. "You mean the truth?" Troy's smile tightened just slightly at the edges, like a man trying to hide a toothache while giving a TED Talk. "We understand that some of this has been upsetting, but we're concerned about the tone. About the escalation." Escalation. That's what they were calling it now. Me blowing the whistle on a documented, coordinated attempt to force out a senior employee before a union vote was now considered escalation. Not the plotting, not the email trail, not the falsified performance logs or the public undermining. My reaction to all of that was the real problem. They weren't interested in justice or facts. They were here to quarantine the noise. And if they couldn't bury the story, they were going to bury me instead. I looked around the room for a moment, just to give myself a second to breathe. They'd picked Conference Room D for this little show, a soundproof corner box with a fake plant in the window and a poster on the wall about emotional intelligence in the workplace. I stared at that poster for a beat, then looked back at Troy. "You ever have your name pulled off a project you created?" I asked him. He blinked but didn't answer. "You ever work 60-hour weeks for a team that pretends you don't exist the second a younger guy shows up with slicker shoes and half the qualifications?" Troy didn't respond, of course. He just tapped his pen against the table and said, "We're offering you a generous transition package, Mark. A neutral reference. Extended health care. It's a good deal. A good deal." Like they were selling me a used car instead of erasing my name from a place I'd helped build from the ground up. I glanced at the manila envelope he slid across the table, still sealed like it contained state secrets and not a standard HR script with a few custom details penciled in. I didn't touch it. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I've already spoken to the union." That was the first time Troy flinched. Not much, just a flicker behind the eyes, but it was there. I could see the calculations happening behind his forehead, the way corporate people start measuring fallout in real time. They thought I was bluffing. Or maybe they thought Karen would keep me in check, that she'd convince me to bow out gracefully for the good of the organization. What they didn't realize was that Karen's warning had been the final nail, not because it hurt, but because it showed me how deep the rot had spread. I stood up slowly, deliberately letting the chair squeak a little just to cut the silence. "You think I'm the risk," I said, but all I did was tell the truth. Maybe the real risk is what happens when people start listening. I left the envelope on the table and walked out without another word. Troy didn't try to follow me. He didn't even get up. He just sat there, staring at that damn folder like it was supposed to contain my silence, and now he had no idea what came next. By the time I got back to my desk, the rumor mill had already started churning. I could feel the shift in the air. Quiet conversations stopped when I passed. People glanced up from Slack messages with that guilty expression you only get when someone's name is trending internally for reasons that don't fit in a spreadsheet. But a funny thing happened in the days that followed. The silence didn't stay silent. One by one, people started coming to me, some with questions, some just to say, "I saw what you did." A couple even forwarded me old project logs, emails, back-channel messages Carl had sent about restructuring. I started compiling a dossier not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted a record. I wanted someone, somewhere, to understand that I hadn't just made noise for the sake of it. I was fighting for my name. The union vote was less than a week away. My termination hadn't been finalized yet, and I knew they were stalling, hoping I'd blink first, hoping I'd sign that envelope and walk away while they still had time to sweep up the mess. But I wasn't going to blink. If they thought I was going to fold because some guy in a tight polo and rehearsed empathy tried to scare me into silence, they hadn't been paying attention. I wasn't just another burned-out middle manager clinging to his chair. I was the guy who still had the floor plans, the wiring diagram, and the fire exit key. And now that I'd seen the rot behind the walls, I wasn't leaving quietly. I was going to bring the whole thing into the light. There's something weirdly peaceful about the moment right before you flip the switch, like the silence before a thunderstorm when the air gets thick and heavy and full of potential, and everybody knows something's coming. But no one wants to say it out loud for fear they'll call it down faster. That was the energy in the office the week of the union vote: tense smiles, awkward hallway nods, whispered meetings in conference rooms with the blinds drawn and the doors locked tight. They thought firing me would send a message, a clear, clean warning to anyone thinking about stirring the pot, but instead it made people start asking why someone like me, someone who'd been there since before we had badge scanners on the doors, was suddenly being shown the exit like a problem that needed solving. I didn't campaign, at least not in the way they expected me to. I didn't make posters or send all-staff emails or stand in the cafeteria with a clipboard begging for votes. All I did was tell the truth, first to a few people I trusted, then to a few more who came to me quietly after meetings, and then to anyone who was willing to listen. I showed them the emails. I showed them the resource logs and the budget cuts and the project timelines they'd never seen because Carl had quietly shifted ownership away from public dashboards. I told them about the offboarding strategy, and more importantly, I asked them a question I already knew the answer to. Do you think they'd do it to you next? Because the truth is, they would. They always do. That's how the machine works. It chews up the people who know too much, cost too much, speak too much, until all that's left are the ones who don't remember what the place used to feel like when we still believed in it. And slowly, word spread. I didn't need to force anything. The story told itself. I gave one real speech, and even then, I wasn't planning to. It just happened. It was during a Friday staff lunch, the kind where upper management rolls in with catered sandwiches and a few forced jokes, pretending to be part of the crowd for 20 minutes before retreating back into their glass offices. Carl wasn't there, of course. He'd started working remote the same week things got heated, which basically meant he was hiding from the very people he claimed to lead. I stood up after someone asked me what really happened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point fingers. I just laid it all out, simple and clear and as honest as I could manage without breaking something in my chest. I'm not here to get my job back, I said, and I'm not asking for pity. I just want to make sure the next guy doesn't get blindsided like I did. Because I gave this place everything I had, my time, my family time, my health some weeks, and when I finally asked for backup, I got a knife in the back instead. If that sounds fair to you, vote how you want. But if you're tired of being treated like parts instead of people, maybe it's time we stop pretending silence protects us. That was all. I sat down, finished my coffee, and tried not to think too hard about what came next. The vote was held the following Monday. Ballots came in anonymously, digitally, but the mood in the office was electric in a way I hadn't felt since the early years when we still believed we were building something meaningful. People looked each other in the eye again. They asked questions. They stopped letting management speak in platitudes without pushing back. By Thursday, the results were announced. I wasn't just elected union rep, I won by a landslide. Over 70% of the vote. And just like that, everything started shifting. Not fast, not dramatically, but you could feel it like a change in wind direction. People started checking their contracts. They started asking HR for written follow-ups. They stopped whispering and started organizing. Carl resigned the next week. No press release, no all-hands farewell, just a vague email from the VP saying he'd decided to pursue new opportunities, which is corporate speak for the heat got too high, and he bailed before he got burned. Karen stepped down too, though hers came with a quiet little note thanking us for the opportunity, like she was still trying to pretend she hadn't chosen her promotion over the people she was supposed to protect. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a party. I didn't even post on LinkedIn. I just kept showing up, doing the work, and reminding people they didn't have to take crap just because someone with a title said it with a smile. I didn't get my old role back, but I didn't want it anymore. That part of my life, the long hours, the blind loyalty, the endless optimism that hard work alone could insulate you from betrayal, was done. I was someone else now. Not just the guy who fixed broken projects. I was the guy who cracked the system open and made enough noise that even the people hiding behind spreadsheets had to take notice. And on my last official day, because yeah, I didn't stay forever, I walked past the front desk, badge in hand, and paused for a second. The receptionist smiled. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. I dropped my badge in the return bin, looked up at the giant company logo on the wall, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not triumph, not victory, peace, because I hadn't won everything. I'd lost time, sleep, respect for people I thought were better. My marriage had taken a hit from the stress, and I had more gray in my beard than I did 6 months ago. But I left on my terms. I made sure the truth got out. I reminded people that one voice, even a tired, angry, middle-aged one, could still matter when it was finally loud enough. And maybe that's the closest thing to justice people like me ever get. So let me ask you something. If it had been you sitting in that room with the envelope on the table and the lies stacked against you, would you have kept quiet? Or would you have lit the match too?